Jack Steele didn't expect his morning to start with a Tyrannosaurus Rex on the loose. But there it was, barreling down the alley like a freight train made of muscle, teeth, and fury. The neon glow of the city lights flickered like a bad signal as he sprinted, a shadow in the maze of tight streets. He had no idea what kind of bad day this would turn into, but he'd seen worse. Could this get any weirder? He muttered to himself, as he ducked into a narrow side street, narrowly avoiding the creature's thrashing tail. The damn dinosaur was wearing a lab coat. Jack shook his head, trying to focus. His instincts were sharp, his mind calculating. If he didn't stop this, the city would be flooded with more of them, rampant, mutated experiments gone wrong. He didn't have the luxury of time to figure out why or how, just that he had to finish this. The creature's footfalls shook the ground as Jack threw himself into a dumpster, rolling into the shadows. From here, he could see the massive, mutated T-Rex, no longer a human being but an oversized, mindless force of nature. Its eyes gleamed with an unnatural intelligence as it sniffed the air, searching for him, but Jack had an advantage. A memory, a mutation, a design, whatever you wanted to call it, Jack was no ordinary man. He'd been turned into a living weapon long before the world had seen its first dinosaur rampage. The virus, a failed experiment that had now gotten loose, had infected the world. But Jack was immune. And as for his enemies? Well, they didn't know it yet, but he was a dinosaur warrior, designed with genetic modifications to handle the very crisis he now faced. As the dinosaur crept closer, Jack leaped from his hiding spot, drawing his weapon, a compact grenade launcher, designed for emergencies like this. He fired. The blast hit the creature square in the chest, sending it tumbling backward into a row of vending machines. Jack didn't wait to see if it was dead. He couldn't afford the time. He had bigger things to do. With a smirk, he turned on his heel and sprinted toward the city's underground tunnels, where answers awaited. The sound of sirens wailed in the distance as Jack moved through the labyrinthine tunnels, his boots echoing against the concrete walls. The world had changed. Or maybe it was Jack who had. He didn't feel like a human anymore, not in the traditional sense. His skin was still that of a man, but the memories of his transformations were always just beneath the surface. He was the product of a dark and twisted experiment, a soldier created for the end of the world. And the world had changed. He was one of the few left who knew how to fight it. Jack's phone buzzed in his pocket, the call from Dr. Lien pulling him from his thoughts. Jack, her voice crackled through the receiver, it's spreading faster than we anticipated. This thing, this virus, it's everywhere now. It's gone airborne, Jack. No one is safe. Jack stopped walking. What are you talking about? I thought we had time. We don't. The mutations are more advanced than we thought. Soon, it won't just be soldiers, civilians, ordinary people, anyone who gets exposed, they'll start transforming. And not into anything we can control. We're talking full dinosaur DNA. Great, Jack said, sarcasm lacing his voice. We're all going to be eaten by the dinosaurs we're supposed to stop. What else is new? He could almost hear Dr. Lien's exhausted sigh. Jack, you need to get to the facility. The original research, it's still out there, in the hands of people who want to weaponize the virus. There's a cure, but you need to retrieve it. You're the only one who can stop this. The facility is a death trap, Jack responded, his voice flat. You know that. I've been there before. That's why you're the best one for the job. Jack could feel the weight of the words settle in. What if I don't come back? Don't you dare, Jack. We've invested too much into you. He glanced up, his eyes scanning the tunnel ahead. Yeah, well, we all make our choices, document. See you on the other side. Jack's journey to the facility was anything but simple. He had to move fast, very fast. He couldn't risk being slowed down by unnecessary obstacles. The virus was relentless, and the world was beginning to crumble under its weight. He passed through military checkpoints, dodging patrols and keeping low, until he finally reached the outskirts of the old volcanic research complex that had once been the site of humanity's greatest scientific advancements. The place was deserted now, a ghost town. Once a hub of innovation, it had turned into a place where humanity's darkest ambitions had run unchecked. "Still looks like a bad idea," Jack muttered to himself as he crouched behind an overgrown wall, scanning the area. The air smelled like decay, like the promise of disaster. But Jack wasn't scared. He'd been here before. After all, that he slipped into the building through an old maintenance hatch, one that hadn't been used in years. Inside, the facility was eerily quiet. A few scattered lights flickered dimly above, revealing an abandoned lab filled with rusting equipment and shredded documents. There was no time for nostalgia. Jack was here for one thing, and one thing only: to stop the virus from spreading any further. But what he didn't know was that the virus wasn't just a threat to the outside world, it was a threat to him. The more he was exposed, the more he could feel the mutation working beneath his skin. His hands were already starting to feel a little too warm, his fingers tingling with the sensation of something else creeping in. He pushed the thought aside. There was no room for weakness now. "Welcome back," came a voice from behind him. Jack spun, his hand going to the weapon at his side. Standing in front of him, an imposing figure emerged from the shadows. It was a man, but not quite. It was Project Apex, a failure of the very virus Jack was trying to stop. The man had fully transformed into a hybrid of human and dinosaur, an intelligent T-Rex with the mind of a man. Apex grinned, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. "You've been exposed, haven't you? You can feel it. The virus is in your blood, Jack. You can't run from that." Jack didn't answer immediately. Instead, he tightened his grip on his weapon, his pulse quickening. The fight was about to get personal. Very personal. "Why are you doing this?" Jack asked, his voice low, steady. "What happened to the man I once knew?" "That man is gone," Apex replied. "I've seen what the virus can do. I've embraced it. You should too, Jack. You'll be so much more. Don't you see? You're part of the future." Jack shook his head. "The future's not some Jurassic nightmare. It's not going to happen. Not while I'm still breathing." The two faced each other, a standoff. Jack's mind raced as he calculated his next move. He knew this wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a fight for identity, for humanity. If Apex succeeded in convincing him to embrace the virus, it would be the end of Jack Steele, and the world as he knew it. The air was thick with tension as Jack and Apex stared each other down. The hybrid dinosaur-turned-man moved slowly, purposefully, circling him like a predator testing the wind. Jack's hand tightened around his weapon. He was outnumbered and outmatched, but that wasn't the part that made him nervous. No, it was the idea that, somehow, deep inside, he might still be too much like Apex, that this virus might be working its way under his skin just as it had with every other soldier, scientist, and civilian who had come into contact with it. Apex was right about one thing: Jack could feel the change beginning. His body didn't quite feel like his own anymore. But he refused to let that stop him. He wasn't going to let the virus take him. He had a mission. And he wasn't going to let a monstrous hybrid stand in his way. "You've been experimenting on people, Apex," Jack said, his voice hard, trying to hold on to the part of himself that was still human. "Why? Why turn people into this nightmare?" Apex let out a low, rumbling laugh. "Experimenting? Oh no, Jack. I wasn't an experiment. I chose this. We all did. You could, too. You're a warrior, designed to survive the impossible. This virus, its power, Jack. Its evolution. We're becoming more. You'll see it soon enough." Jack's teeth ground together. The hybrid was clearly delusional, believing that this transformation was some kind of progress. But Jack wasn't ready to join the ranks of monsters. "You're wrong," Jack said flatly. "The world doesn't need more monsters. It needs people who can stop things like this. People who can fix the mess we've made. You think this virus is evolution? I think it's a damn mistake, and I'm not going to let it take over." Apex's grin stretched wider. "You're more like me than you think. It's already inside you, Jack. You can feel it, can't you?" The hybrid's voice was hypnotic, seductive. "The rage. The power. It's who we're supposed to be." Jack's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel it. The animal side of him, the primitive urges, started bubbling up, pushing against the edge of his consciousness. He forced himself to breathe deeply, to center himself. He wouldn't let it take over. Not now. Not ever. Apex's eyes narrowed, sensing the struggle. "You're just like all the others," he sneered. "Fighting it. But eventually, you'll give in. And when you do, Jack, you'll be unstoppable. You'll be free. You'll be everything you were made to be." Jack didn't reply. Instead, he moved with a speed that was almost unnatural, diving for cover behind a nearby pillar. The hybrid lunged at him with terrifying speed, but Jack was already gone, circling behind Apex, using his military training to stay one step ahead. Without warning, Jack fired, the blast echoing through the empty lab. Apex roared in anger and pain, his body flinging backward, crashing into a bank of consoles. But even as the hybrid staggered to his feet, Jack knew it was just a matter of time before the creature recovered. These things, mutated, evolved, they were strong, resilient. Jack's weapon wasn't enough to stop them permanently. Not unless he could find a way to disable the virus itself. The hybrid stumbled, shaking his head as he stood. "You can't stop this, Jack," he said, his voice dark with certainty. "It's already too late." Jack's fingers trembled, not from fear but from the change that was now coursing through him. He could feel the edges of his vision blur, his muscles tightening in unfamiliar ways. But he pushed it back, focusing. The mission. Dr. Lien. The cure. "I'm not done yet," Jack growled, his voice raw. He ran toward a nearby control panel, quickly accessing it with a few keystrokes. He wasn't sure what he was looking for exactly, but if there was any chance of reversing this, he'd find it here. The facility was still full of systems running on life support, scientific data, genetic sequencing, viral research. He had to find the key to it all. A way to undo what had been done, but before he could do anything more, Apex was on him again. With a roar, the hybrid lunged, claws outstretched, swiping through the air with the speed of a predator closing in on its prey. Jack barely dodged the swipe, his body instinctively twisting out of the way. His mind raced. He had to outthink this thing. He couldn't beat it head to head. He needed to be smarter. In a blur of movement, Jack grabbed a steel pipe from the floor, swinging it with all his strength. The hybrid grunted, but it wasn't enough to take him down. Apex retaliated by launching himself forward, pinning Jack to the ground. For a moment, Jack felt the weight of the creature's massive form pressing down on him. He could feel the heat of its breath, the terrible, unstoppable force that could crush him in an instant. The transformation was already happening to him. He could feel it in his bones, the wild power, the rage, the hunger. But then he remembered. Dr. Lien had said there was a cure. And there was no way in hell he was going to let Apex be the one to win. Jack summoned all his strength, pushing against the hybrid's chest, fighting against the overwhelming sense of dread threatening to consume him. His body felt like it was on fire, his limbs aching as if they were being stretched to their limits. But he refused to give in. He could still fight. He could still win. With a final, desperate push, Jack freed himself from Apex's grip and rolled to his feet. He looked around, his gaze flicking from one piece of equipment to the next, finally landing on a massive control panel near the center of the lab. His eyes widened as he realized what it was, the viral containment systems. If he could shut them down, if he could release the virus genetic sequence from the system, it might be the key to reversing everything. He didn't have much time. Apex was already recovering, his eyes glowing with predatory malice. With a grunt of effort, Jack dashed toward the panel. He slammed his fist into the control pad, causing the system to hum with life. A new sequence appeared on the screen, a viral map of the infection, complete with genetic markers. It was a crude but functional system. Jack's mind raced. He had to make a choice, and then, a voice interrupted his thoughts. "You're wasting your time," Apex sneered, his massive form appearing behind him. "That data is locked. You'll never be able to unlock it in time. We're all going to be dinosaurs, Jack. We're all going to be free." Jack didn't look back. Instead, his fingers flew over the keyboard, activating the emergency decryption protocols. "Not today," Jack muttered, the virus inside him pushing against his will, but he wasn't giving in. Not now. Not when the world needed him to stop this madness. The console beeped and whirred. The data unlocked. The cure was within reach. A final moment of clarity hit Jack's mind. With a sharp motion, he hit the last command. The facility shook. The lights flickered. Then, everything went dark. The hum of the facility's machinery stilled, and for a long, heart-stopping moment, everything seemed to fall silent. Jack stood frozen, his breath coming in shallow gasps, his mind racing. The lights flickered and then went out completely, plunging the room into darkness. His senses sharpened, he could feel it. He could hear it, the heavy, labored breathing of Apex behind him. The hybrid's claws scraped across the floor as it slowly closed in, no doubt sensing the same sudden change in the atmosphere. Jack clenched his fists, the raw power of the virus swirling within him, threatening to overwhelm him, but he had made it this far. He couldn't let it take him now. The screen in front of him was blank, its once bright data now swallowed by the abyss. It didn't matter. The cure was in his mind now. The information, the sequence, it was there. He could feel the plan clicking into place. Apex's voice slithered through the darkness like a snake, cold and venomous. "It's too late, Jack. You can't stop it. This place is a tomb now. All you've done is delay the inevitable." Jack's heart pounded. He could hear the echo of Apex's footsteps drawing closer, but he wasn't about to let this go. Not now. The ground trembled underfoot as Apex took another step, his monstrous form casting a long shadow across the lab's cold floor. The predator was toying with him, and Jack hated it. He wasn't going to be some lab experiment. He wasn't going to be a monster. Jack moved swiftly, his muscles on fire with both his human instincts and the surge of primal energy coursing through him. He reached the backup power panel near the center of the room and began frantically pulling wires from the control board. He didn't need to understand the system. He just needed to sabotage it. If he could cut the power entirely, it would disrupt Apex's ability to track him, if only for a few precious moments. Apex's voice, now tinged with a note of amusement, spoke from the shadows. "You're still trying to outrun this, Jack? You think this little trick will save you? You can't fight it. You can't fight me." The word stung, but Jack's resolve hardened. He knew Apex had already crossed the line. The virus had taken the human out of him. Apex was nothing more than a beast now. No matter how much he tried to convince Jack of the virus's power, Jack knew the truth. The cure was real, and he had it. He just had to release it. He just had to make sure the world would never see creatures like Apex again. With a sharp pull, Jack ripped the wires from their sockets, and the room plunged into absolute darkness. For a moment, everything was quiet. Then the low, guttural growl of Apex filled the silence. The hybrid had stopped moving, momentarily disoriented by the blackout. Jack could hear the heavy footfalls of the monster searching for him, but he kept perfectly still, letting the virus inside of him go calm. It was now or never. The power in the facility might have been down, but the cure, the cure, was still within his reach. He didn't need the system. He didn't need the complex. He had the formula in his head. Jack Steele was the key. Not Apex. Not the virus. Where are you, Jack? Apex's voice cut through the darkness, dripping with malice. I'll find you. I always find you. Jack's muscles tensed. He had to act fast. He could feel the changes inside of him, the weight of the virus pushing against his mind. He could feel his hands begin to lengthen slightly, his skin hardening at the edges. The change was happening. It was coming for him, whether he liked it or not. But if he could just get to the core, if he could inject the serum, the antidote, it might save him. He made a break for it, sprinting across the room, using the darkness to his advantage. The sound of Apex's claws scraping across the concrete floor grew louder behind him. Jack moved faster, pushing his body to the edge. His lungs burned, but he kept going, his eyes locked on the distant console where the last vial of serum was kept, the one piece of the puzzle that would save them all. He reached the console, his hand slamming down on the button to open the secure compartment. The vial inside was small, glimmering faintly in the dark. It was the size of a test tube, but Jack knew its contents could save the human race. A single drop would neutralize the virus in anyone infected. He had the cure in his hands, but just as he grasped the vial, a blur of movement came from behind him. Apex was faster than Jack had anticipated. Before Jack could react, he felt a massive weight slam into him. The hybrid's claws dug into his shoulders, and the two went crashing to the ground. Jack's head hit the floor hard, his vision spinning, but the vial, remained clenched tightly in his hand. His pulse hammered in his ears. Apex's voice was a low, guttural snarl. "You're not getting away this time, Jack. Not this time." Jack's body was screaming at him to give in, to let the change take over. The virus was taking hold of him faster now, his body moving in strange, new ways, as if the very DNA inside him was rewriting itself. His muscles swelled. His vision sharpened. His instincts screamed at him to fight, to destroy. But Jack fought back, clinging to his humanity with every ounce of willpower he had left. With a guttural growl, Jack shoved his elbow into Apex's side, throwing the hybrid off him. The beast howled in rage, stumbling back, but Jack didn't wait. He lunged toward the vial of serum, unscrewing the cap with a trembling hand. "Stay back!" Jack yelled, his voice raw, wild. But the virus was already making him less human, less in control. He could feel the primal side of him pushing through, could feel the blood in his veins burning. His body was becoming something else. Apex charged again, faster this time, but Jack wasn't about to let the hybrid win. With a scream, he injected the serum into his neck. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing happened. Then, everything exploded. The pain was unbearable, as though his very cells were being torn apart and rebuilt from scratch. He felt his body contorting, reshaping, as the cure worked its way through his bloodstream. His heart thudded in his chest, his head spinning as the transformation reversed. The pressure in his veins eased, the burning sensation that had consumed him fading. His vision cleared, his mind returned. He was Jack Steele again. Apex, too, seemed to be struggling. His roar was one of frustration and rage as he staggered, his own transformation slowing, reversing. It wasn't complete. The virus had its hold on him, but it was no longer in full control. Jack stumbled to his feet, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He wiped the sweat from his forehead, his eyes locking onto Apex. "This is over," Jack said quietly, but with finality. Apex didn't reply. He couldn't. The virus had taken too much of him. With one last, desperate screech, the hybrid collapsed to the floor, defeated. The lab was silent once more, the hum of the facility's machinery slowly dying away as the lights flickered back to life. Jack stood alone in the center of the room, breathing heavily, the vial of serum still clutched in his hand. It was over, but the battle had only just begun.